And welcome to another edition of Community Matters. I'm Jim Cameron, Program Director of Darien TV 79. We are joined today by Nancy Coughlin, who is the CEO of Person to Person. And it's great to have you on the program.
So good to be here. Thanks for having me, Jim.
Thanks for joining us. Community Matters is a show on TV 79 that talks about what's going on in the community, the NGOs, the non-government organizations, civic groups, etc. And perhaps none is better known outside of Darien and inside as well too, as Person to Person. So maybe you could give us a little background on how Person to Person got started, and then we can talk a little bit about your good works.
So we were formed in 1968 by a group of parishioners at St. Luke's Parish in Darien. The rector at the time had been in seminary with Dr. King. So when Dr. King was assassinated, the rector wanted to have a response that involved the community and gave purpose and meaning to the tragedy. So a group of parishioners came together and formed Person to Person. In the earliest years, one of the first acts we did was to give a scholarship to a single mom to allow her to finish college. It was $1,248. And our scholarship program has been one of our longest running programs ever since then. And we started with a small food pantry and a clothing exchange where people could bring their gently used items and they would be given to people in the community who needed them. And that grew from a small closet in the parish building at St. Luke's to what is now 3 locations in Norwalk, Stamford, and Darien, and a food system program that's providing enough food to prepare over 2 million meals each year. So it has grown significantly, as has our clothing program as well, and financial assistance. Those were really the main programs that we started with. We also, in the very early ages, did a lot of work around what was then called, reconciliation and racial awareness, and now might be called racial justice. But some of the early work involved multicultural bridges, programs that were designed to bring people together to understand different cultures. Our first executive director's name was Jean Sherman, and she unfortunately passed away over the summer. And after she did, I had the pleasure to speak with her husband, Bill, who's absolutely lovely, and shared with me lots of funny stories about those earliest years and some of the work they did, and also shared with me some historic files and paper clippings. And one of them was talking about how they would organize a group of dinners. So they would have groups of parishioners in Darien have dinner with groups of Black Panthers. And so they would go into New York City and meet with Black Panthers in the city, and they would invite the Black Panthers to come up to Darien. And he talked about how they would make sure to call the police and let the police know that this was happening so that people would have safe passage, because it was a very, it was a very different time. I'd like to think that we've changed so much since 1968, but we know, of course, that there's still much work to do in that arena. So it's one area that in the 90s and early 2000s, took a little more of a backseat. We used to do a lot of partnerships with other nonprofits in town, and is something that is interwoven into all of the work that we do, of course, because so much of the reason for our existence is the income inequality that exists in our area. And a lot of that is related to the racial wealth gap and the fact that people were really locked out of wealth building opportunities for many, many years. And we're seeing the impact of that now in the people that we're serving at Person to Person. So
let's talk a little bit about who it is you're serving, your clients, as you call them.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they? Where do they live? And why do they need help?
So we serve 7 towns in southern Lower Fairfield County. the Stamford-Norwalk corridor and the surrounding communities, Weston, Westport, Wilton, New Canaan, and Darien. And we have a smattering of clients that come from other towns in the area. Most of our clients are Stamford residents. About 60% of our clients are Stamford residents. Most of them work. Before the pandemic, I would tell you that they were working 2 and 3 jobs, mostly in the leisure and hospitality industries that were low wage jobs. Coming out of the Great Recession in 2010, there was a real shift in the number of jobs and the type of jobs that existed in Lower Fairfield County. And when we lost jobs in the finance industry, they were replaced primarily by low wage jobs in the hospitality and leisure sectors and medical. The medical hospitals is another large employer in our area. But what happened was even coming into the pandemic recession, Connecticut still had not regained all of the jobs lost during the Great Recession. So we still hadn't gotten back to where we were in 2008. So the people that we're serving are really those people who have been digging out from the Great Recession, trying to rebuild their lives, trying to rebuild their wealth. And as I said, many, many working multiple jobs, working low wage jobs. About 20% of the people we serve are seniors. So many are not working and are not going to ever, overcome the financial situation they're in because they're living on fixed incomes. And just under half, about 43% of the people we're serving are children. So it kind of gives you a sense of the age demographic. Unsurprisingly, most are women, but reflective of the population. So we're about 60-40 women versus men. And as I said, most of them are working. Some have disabilities that prevent them from working. Some are overcoming personal obstacles that make it difficult for them to work or earn an income for a short amount of time. Some have obstacles that are making it difficult for them to support themselves long term. So it really runs the gamut. Sometimes people come to us for 1 or 2 months. Maybe they have a crisis, their house burns down or something like that. And others, as I say, are with us for longer periods of time. When we ask people why they come to person, the 2 most common reasons people cite is a medical emergency or a medical condition, a health condition, and the high cost of living. And the high cost of living is primarily around housing. Housing is so expensive in Fairfield County that it really makes it difficult for people to afford the basic necessities that they need to live. So having help with either rent assistance on occasion or help with food and clothing and some of those basic necessities frees up their income to go toward high rent or heat, utilities, car repairs, all of the expenses that people have on a day-to-day basis.
Are any of the people that you help residents of Darien?
Yes. Not the overwhelming majority, as you would imagine. As I said, most of our residents, our clients are residents of Stamford and then Norwalk. About 35% are Norwalk residents, and probably about 5% come from the surrounding communities. So that includes Darien, but we do help Darien residents. And of course, we have many, many Darien residents who are volunteers. We have a very active youth group program with high school kids who will volunteer and middle school kids who will volunteer. Many of our clothing donors are volunteers, and we do like to think that part of what we're doing is providing a service to people, particularly who are clothing donors and are looking for a responsible, environmentally responsible way to give their gently used clothes another life and pass them along to somebody who will appreciate them and needs them and keeps them out of the landfill. So we do like to think of our clothing center as a service that we're providing to people who are donating clothing and shoes and household items and sheets and towels and linens.
Nancy Coughlin is our guest today on Community Matters. She is the CEO of Person to Person. How do people find out about Person to Person if they're in need? How are they referred, or is it just word of mouth? How do they know?
A lot of it is word of mouth. We work with, a very strong social service agency structure. So many people find out about us through other organizations that they're working with. School social workers often are a source of information for people. Um, Housing authorities, really anybody who works with low income populations of people, they know that if you refer somebody to person, they'll get help with the items that they need. And that they also will have the opportunity to meet with one of our caseworkers. We have a team of caseworkers who are all bilingual and are able to make referrals, provide information, and assess people's needs and connect them with the resources that they need. So we actually just received an award through the City of Stamford's humanitarian fund that the city set up during the pandemic. And one of the reasons they granted us some funds for rent assistance is because they know that when they refer somebody to person, we're not just going to solve the one need that they were referred for. We're going to really take a comprehensive look and make sure that we're meeting all of their needs.
So you're like a doctor. I may come in saying I've got a sprained finger, but you find that I have a broken arm and I have cancer as well too.
That's right. And there may be a reason that you're in the situation that you're in that we can help you overcome. So we can connect people with who are the job training programs in the area, who are the organizations that can provide other information and resources to them to address the situation they have. We will negotiate with landlords often on rent payment programs. So somebody might be behind on their rent, we can provide them some funding to get them caught up, but we also will work with them and their landlord to make sure that they're not going to be evicted and that their landlord will make a payment plan. And many people often don't know what their rights are, what options are available to them. They might not feel empowered to try to stand up for their rights or advocate for themselves, and our caseworkers are able to help them do that as well. So we really try to provide wraparound services, take a holistic view of the person. They might have family members who have other challenges that are ancillary to the challenges that they have coming to us. They might come to us because they need rent assistance, but they might have a child with special needs, or they might have a family member who's going through some medical challenges, or they might have somebody who's, their neighbor who wants to move in with them because they're facing challenges. So we're really able to take a holistic view of people. And then they often will share that information with their friends and neighbors. So word of mouth is a very large way that people find out about person to person and the services that we provide.
You mentioned the clothing program, which is headquartered in your offices in Darien.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the food assistance program? Are
Mm-hmm.
people in this area actually hungry?
They are. They are. So back in the 90s, what we thought of as food stamps was eliminated, and the program was replaced with something called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So SNAP, as it's known,
right.
Is not intended to provide the full complement of what a family would need. It's intended to be supplemental, exactly what's in the title. So even people who are getting food assistance from the government, often it's not enough to meet their full need. So many of the people that we serve that are coming to a food pantry on a regular basis, they're receiving SNAP benefits, but they still need extra benefits. Others are not eligible. We know that we serve some undocumented people. We don't ask for documentation status. So we don't actually know who's documented or undocumented, but we do know that people who are undocumented don't have access to the government benefits that others do. So they often will come to person for assistance. And during the pandemic, of course, there was lots of publicity about how food insecurity was on the rise. Mm-hmm. We had a 70% jump in the number of people looking to us for food assistance during the pandemic.
70%.
70.
You almost
70.
doubled the number of clients that you
Almost
were dealing
doubled.
with through food.
Yes. It was a huge increase in demand. Now, some of those people were people who were temporarily unemployed. And remember, in the beginning of the pandemic, there was that great delay in unemployment benefits coming through. So there were people like graphic designers, dental hygienists, people who, had never needed assistance before, but suddenly found themselves out of work with no clients, no customers, and potentially no income for months. So, we were able to help them get on their feet. Those numbers, that population of people has really not continued to come to person for food assistance, but others have. So what we saw was in the beginning of the pandemic, we had this very large jump. It leveled off a little bit, and it has started to pick up again. Most recently now with the pandemic, with COVID increasing again, some people are back to not working. So we are seeing those numbers creep up. We're probably down about 2% off of the peak of the pandemic. So that's still extremely high numbers of people needing food assistance. And financial assistance as well. Rent assistance is just as high as it was at the height of the pandemic. So the need has really not gone away. And we saw this.
The food that you provide through both the pantry operation in Darien and your Norwalk and Stamford satellite operations, if you will, and you have a food truck as well too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Where does that food come from?
So most of the food that we distribute, we purchase or receive through Connecticut Food Share, which is our statewide food bank. And they really are able to be a clearinghouse for large corporate donations. So they can accept 18-wheelers of food that then they will distribute to food pantries around the state. It's a hub and spoke system, really akin to, they're like a wholesaler and we're like the retailer. The customer comes to us, but we get much of our food through them. We also get a fair amount of our food through food rescue. Grocery stores, restaurants will donate items that bakeries, items that are not sold or getting close to their expiration date or have rebranded or they've discontinued the flavor, all sorts of reasons why corporations will donate food directly to us. And then, of course, we have food drives that individuals will do and will donate food. So so
this is not just government cheese then, right?
Yeah, so there is still a government food program. It does not look like those big blocks of cheese we had, when I was a kid, but we do get free government food. And then we also purchase food. So we'll purchase food through wholesalers, and we typically will purchase food that doesn't get donated. So things like frozen meat, we purchase eggs, we purchase fresh fruits and vegetables, because what we want to do is make sure that when somebody comes to us for food assistance, they're not just getting food that's donated, they're getting food that they can prepare meals for. So they can have a healthy complement of food for every member of their family to meet their health and nutritional needs. It's very important to us that we're making sure that we're prioritizing health and nutrition.
You have a nutritionist that consults on some of this as well too?
We do. Every few years, we'll have a nutritionist look at our shopping list and make sure that it's balanced. And we'll look at places where we can tweak or increase or add. We just this past summer, we increased across a number of categories of food. So when a family comes, they'll receive a shopping list, and they will, the self-select method allows them to choose the actual food that they want, so they can pick foods that either their family wants to eat, particularly their kids. If their kids are particular, they can choose which kind of cereal they want, for example. We also, allowing people to choose their own food, respects the cultural role of food. It respects the religious role of food. It allows people to shop and accommodate their own dietary restrictions. So it's important to us that we have a self-select method. Within that self-select method, we will have different categories. So for example, Every family will get a certain amount of protein, a certain amount of grains, a certain amount of dairy, a certain amount of fresh fruits and vegetables. In fact, we never have a limit on the fresh fruits and vegetables that we give to people, and we put it right up front in the pantry. So when you come in, the first thing you see is fresh fruits and vegetables, and we tell people, take as much as you want, take as much as your family will eat before it goes bad. And we never want to limit that. We want to encourage people to have as much as possible.
Nancy Coughlin is our guest today on the program. I'm Jim Cameron, and I'm the host of this show, and it's called Community Matters, where we talk to folks in the community who are helping make a difference. And Person to Person is an organization that certainly fits into that category. I want to drop a video in here that you narrated. I think it's almost a year old now. And it was it really spoke to how Person to Person was handling the services that you want to provide in the midst of the pandemic. So let's take a look at this brief video.
Every day when I arrive at work, I say good morning to the volunteers. It's early, but there's always one volunteer who gets there before me. She works full-time, and she comes in every morning before work to pack groceries in our food pantry for an hour before she slips out the door just as the regular volunteers are arriving for the day. One morning, a gentleman told me he lives on disability payments, and it's hard to make ends meet. He doesn't want his adult children to worry about him, but he's lonely living alone. He appreciates coming to the pantry to see our volunteers and our staff as much as to get help with groceries. I asked our pantry staff if they could add an extra pastry to his groceries. They smiled. Apparently, his fondness for our pastries was well known among our staff and volunteers already. We see this in our Norwalk pantry as well. We're in the heart of South Norwalk, and we've been in the neighborhood for decades. Many of our clients walk to the pantry, and more than one stay for a cup of coffee and a conversation. Plenty of others stop by just to pick up a loaf of bread that we always have out for anyone who would like it, appointment or not. We're like the food pantry equivalent of Cheers, where everyone knows your name. The Stamford location launched in 2018 with P2P on Wheels, our mobile food pantry and casework office. Having a mobile pantry allows us to get food where it needs to be, serving the Stamford neighborhoods where our clients live, overcoming the barrier of transportation, and making sure that no one who needs food goes without it, especially our seniors. Our caseworkers meet one-on-one with anyone looking for assistance. Recently, we helped negotiate a rent payment plan with a landlord to avoid a woman being evicted who's got a teenage son and is battling cancer. She just needs some help to get through this rough patch. We don't put up any hurdles to receive assistance. You can walk in off the street and we'll help you today. You can be a citizen or undocumented. We help everyone who needs us. Our caseworkers manage our emergency financial assistance program. This program has quadrupled because of the pandemic. So many people have lost their jobs. Some because they got sick with the virus and couldn't work, and many others because their jobs simply went away. We've transitioned our Darien food pantry from a small self-select grocery store to a drive-through model during the pandemic. So our staff and volunteers are inside a toasty, warm, heated tent, and our clients stay in their cars. One day there was a gentleman who insisted on getting out of his car, even though it was freezing cold out. He was very well dressed. He said, "Everything I'm wearing, I got from Person to Person. See this? You did this." We've had to experiment a bit in our clothing center, pre-packing clothing, offering pop-up shops. But the important thing is that unlike other clothing programs, we never stopped innovating and we never shut down. During this year's toy store, a couple walked up to us and handed us a small check. The man explained that he had come to Person with his mother for clothing and food when he was a child. Now, he and his wife own their own business in Greenwich, and they wanted to give back. We love it when it comes full circle. We see a former client come back to us as a volunteer or a donor, even a board member. We know that the help we give has the power to transform lives. These are just a few stories, and every client has one. At Person to Person, we have 28,000 stories, 28,000 individuals have healthier, more stable lives, thanks to the efforts of the volunteers, donors, and community members that make sure, as long as there's a need, P2P is here to help.
That's quite a video, and certainly pulls on my heartstrings as well too. Why did you call that video 28,000 Stories?
During the pandemic, there was so much focus on how we were adjusting, what we were doing, how much we were doing, the surge, how many people we were serving, what the demand was, how we were sourcing food. In the beginning, there were all these supply chain interruptions and we couldn't get the food we needed and we had to be contactless. And there was so much focus on sort of the mechanics of doing the work that we were doing in the context of the pandemic. So it was really important to me to tell the story, to remember that behind every number was a person. And these are people, the stories we were hearing were so heartbreaking and so difficult. There was so much trauma. And it was exhausting, but it was also uplifting because it was just so moving and everybody was coming together. So we called it 28,000 Stories because we were serving 28,000 people and each one really did have their own stories. So that we wanted to just make sure that, we didn't lose sight of the real human impact that the pandemic had. It was very, it was very traumatic for a lot of people, and it still is. People are still suffering in different ways, but there were a lot of communities that were very hard hit and negatively impacted, and so I'm grateful that we had the opportunity to make the difference that we did. Our work was really as critical as ever, and it remains so today. I mean, one of the challenges we face now is a sense of everything's returning to normal. And for a lot of our clients, it's absolutely not. And so, we want people to remember that. Don't forget that there's still people that are suffering.
You mentioned that you have operations as well in Stamford and in Norwalk. What goes on in those facilities that's different from here in Darien?
So in Norwalk, our food pantry is in the heart of South Norwalk. It's a really lovely community. We have a lot of clients who walk to our food pantry. They come and they hang out for the day and they have a cup of coffee. It's really a very special feeling in that community. People really know each other. We also in Norwalk have caseworkers. We have bilingual caseworkers. So we will help people with information and referrals and support, financial assistance for rent, security deposits, utilities, and a variety of other expenses. And our Stamford operation is a mobile food pantry. So we have a warehouse where we can receive food, pallets, donations. We've got walk-in freezers and refrigerators. And then the mobile pantry is a 34-foot truck complete with refrigeration, freezers. It's an entirely self-select model. So the same food that you would get in one of our brick and mortar pantries, you also will get on the on the mobile pantry. You walk in the front of the truck, you walk down the aisle, there's food on either side, you shop and you exit at the back of the vehicle. And we also have a caseworker on the mobile pantry. So that allows us to go out into 7 different neighborhoods in Stamford each week. And we partner with a lot of our nonprofit partners. So, one day we'll be at the Boys and Girls Club and we'll be able to reach families with kids. One day we're at the South End Ferguson Library that has a very different population served in that part of the city. One day we reach an immigrant population. So we're really able to get out into the community and reach different groups of people. And they don't have to worry about transportation. They can just walk up to the truck. We are at a couple of senior housing authority properties. So that's very popular because we've got a group of people for whom transportation is a real barrier, and they can walk outside, and right outside their front door is the mobile pantry once a week. So
do they have to have an
appointment,
appointment, or can they just kind of walk up?
We use an appointment system that mostly helps us manage traffic flow. We will always take a walk-in. So if somebody walks up and needs food, we will get them food right away.
Right. And in the mission statement on your website said, we provide essential services, caseworker support to anyone who requests it. So there's no financial proof that's required. I mean, you just take people at their word that they are hungry or they're really in need of financial assistance. And and people ever cheat? I mean, do people ever come to you and ask for stuff and they really don't need it?
The much greater issue is the people who need help who don't come. That's really the challenge. It is not a challenge having people come who don't need help. Before the pandemic, we talked about the government food program. The government food program has eligibility requirements to them. During the pandemic, essentially, all of those were lifted. And one of the great joys is that we saw that we never really needed them in the first place. Things have worked really just fine without them. So,
I mean, there wasn't a flood of people coming in saying,
was not a
now
flood.
I can get food stamps in effect.
Right,
SNAP
right. And
well, how do you deal with that other issue? I mean, the people for whom pride is very important, and I can imagine that even here in Darien, they don't want to be seen going into person to person. They don't want to ask for help. How do you overcome pride and make sure people are clothed and housed and fed?
Mm-hmm. So there's really two groups of people for whom this is an issue. And I see it a lot with seniors, with older populations of people. They still have a vision in their head of a bread line, and they think that coming to get a food assistance is going to be like standing in line for bread. And I have to say, as much as the outpouring of support during the pandemic for people who needed food, I think seeing those lines of cars, that we saw in Texas, I think it reinforced this idea that, you have to get in line and you wait and you're going to get a bag of food handed to you. Whereas the way we operate is so the opposite. Our food pantries are set up to look like little grocery stores. It's like going to the bodega. So I have had some good experience with some people. I remember one time I was on the phone with a woman, and she was an older woman, and she was just asking questions and kind of beating around the bush. And as the conversation progressed, I started to feel like she needed help, but she didn't want to ask for it. And I said to her, you know what, come on down and just take a look. You don't have to, you won't shop, but I'd love to just show you around and have you come as a visitor. And she came in and she saw that it was okay. And there was no, her dignity was entirely intact. And then she started to come for help because she saw this is perfectly fine. This is nothing to be ashamed of.
And she was in a mask anyhow, so no one would recognize her, right?
This is even before the masks, but that adds a extra level of anonymity. Another thing,
we've been doing this for a while, haven't we, Nancy? This is going on and on. Well, I mean, let me ask. I mean, the pandemic is moving in on its second year now.
Yeah.
How are you holding up? How is your staffing holding up? Traffic increased 70%, you said. And what about volunteers? Are they getting burned out as well too?
The volunteers we have are not getting burned out. They're very, very energized and committed. But we have a very different volunteer pool than we did before the pandemic. Our volunteer pool has always tended to be people who are retired and still active, who are vital and strong and healthy and, are able to lift a lot of, cases of food, but really want to remain active. Many of those people have stopped volunteering and may or may not come back to volunteering. So we have a new group of volunteers. In the beginning of the pandemic, we had a lot of people who were working from home or were furloughed. Now it has settled out a little bit, but we definitely have fewer volunteers than we ever had before. That is a challenge.
You need volunteers now?
We absolutely need volunteers.
What kind of things do you need volunteers to help with?
We need volunteers for everything. So most volunteers will take a weekly shift to sort food, help clients as they shop, pre-pack groceries, because we're still doing a hybrid between curbside pickup. So we'll pre-pack groceries that people can pick up, or people can come in and shop for themselves. So we need to help stocking the shelves. We need help packing groceries. We launched a home delivery program during the pandemic. So originally it was designed to reach people who were quarantined or were sick with COVID. We have kept it. We will continue to keep it. Most of the people who we're serving through we call it door to door, our home delivery program now are seniors or people who have difficulty accessing public transportation or private transportation. So we always need volunteer drivers, which is a great volunteer opportunity if you're looking for something to do with a child or something that you want to make sure is entirely contactless, because that's a contactless program. We need help with volunteers who are willing to sort clothing, and we're doing clothing distributions. So help if you want to be client facing and out in the public working with people. Clothing distributions we need volunteers for. And then we have a number of other food drives is an opportunity that we always can use help with. People can organize in their neighborhoods or their houses of worship or their schools, clubs, that sort of thing. And we have a number of other one-off sort of data entries, things like that. There's really a number of things that we need help with.
Nancy Coughlin, our guest today on Community Matters. She is the CEO of Person to Person, which is based here in Darien on the campus of St. Luke's, and also has offices in Norwalk and in Stamford. And we will include the website address right here. I'm going to put it down here on the screen so you can follow along and see more about the good works of Person to Person. Before we run out of time, you also offer some summer camperships and scholarships for promising academics. Is that true?
That is true. And those are two programs that we have run since we were founded in 1968, and they have grown over the years. Our campership program started with a volunteer having some kids over in their backyard in the 70s. And now we work with Stamford Public School social workers to refer children who have parents who are working. So there's really a dual purpose to the program. On the one hand, we're providing an enriching, safe, traditional summer camp experience for kids who wouldn't otherwise be able to have that experience. And at the same time, we're providing childcare so that the parents can continue working and have access to economic opportunities.
And you do boat camp once a year too in the summer,
boat
right?
Camp. Boat camp is so
What is
fun.
boat camp?
Boat camp is organized by a group of sailors in coordination with Norotan Yacht Club, and they have been doing this for dozens of years. On one day in every summer, a bunch of boat owners will get together who volunteer to take kids out on the boat, and the kids come and go. We do a little training, and they all have their life jackets on, and they have snacks, and they go out on the boat for the day. And the owners of Ziegler's Cove will open up their cove, so the boats go over into this private beach area, and they, fish, and they look for rocks on the sand and shells. And a lot of these kids have never been on boats before, and the fact that we live right here on Long Island Sound, where the water is all around us, but there's so many kids who don't have access to the waterfront, is really astounding. And so the boat owners love being able to provide this opportunity to the kids, and I think they get as much out of it as the kids get out of it. Every year, there's always one or two kids who is terrified, thinks they're going to be seasick, and they invariably come back with just the most giant smiles on their faces. It's really a fun day, and
they do a big barbecue at the end of the day too, right?
At the end,
I have to tell a story, because I went out on one of the boats at boat camp a couple of years ago, and as you say, many of these kids had never been on the water.
Yeah. And
ironically, we live right next to Long Island Sound. And we were on a small boat, and we were approaching Sheffield Island, where there's a lighthouse.
Yeah.
And in the distance, this kid saw this thing approaching, and she said, "Is that the Statue of Liberty?"
Yeah.
No, it's just Sheffield Island. Statue of Liberty is a little further away, but it just kind of speaks to a lack of, I hate to call them underprivileged, but they haven't had a chance to be out on the water. And boat camp is a wonderful opportunity. Let me wrap up here, because a lot of these good works, some of the clothing is donated and some of the food is donated, but you still have staff, you have facilities. What's your annual operating budget, and where does that money come from?
So we're almost entirely privately funded through private philanthropy. We do have some small government funding through the state, but it's very minimal. So most of the funds that we get are through our annual appeal and through family foundations and individuals who make donations to us. Before the pandemic, to run our food program, which is one of our biggest programs, and all of our other programs, we had about a $3.5 million budget. During the pandemic, that budget increased to $5 million, close to $5 million.
Wow.
Most of that increase was in our emergency financial assistance program. So we provided, in the calendar year that just ended, we provided $1.3 million, which is actually more than we provided during the height of the pandemic, when we provided $1.2 million. So that need just became so overwhelming as people were facing evictions and requiring assistance with rent. So that program continues to be high. We hope that we'll be able to sustain that level of support to the community, because we are seeing the demand continue to be strong. The eviction moratorium lifted in the fall, and the Connecticut has done actually a very good job with the rent assistance program that they have administered, but it's still not reaching everybody. So people are facing evictions. We're seeing more people contacting us, trying to get into the shelter system, living in their cars. Our libraries have become a vital resource for people who need access to computers and warm places. And we're working with more libraries who are seeing more homeless people looking for information than we ever have. So it's a need that is continuing. We hope that we'll be able to sustain that level of giving so that we can keep that assistance to keep people safely housed in their homes with their heat on.
One of the people you mentioned in that video we just saw, the 28,000 stories, was the man who showed up at the food bank, and he was rather nicely dressed. And he said, "See this? You did this." And there was also a story of somebody who, came to person and made a small donation, having previously been a client. Does your aid, food, financial assistance, housing assistance, does it bear fruit? Do these people ever dig out? Or is this just a black hole in which we have to keep pouring money?
It absolutely bears out. I mean, we got a note the other day, Monday, I got a note from a young man who made a $1,000 donation to our scholarship program. He is a former scholar, and his note said, "You provided scholarship funds for me for 4 years, and you changed my life." There is no question that, there but for the grace of God, many of us fall on a situation where we need help. And these days, if you don't have family that you can move in with, or who will loan you money interest-free or bail you out of trouble if you get into trouble, it's very difficult to get through a rough patch on your own. Many people do not have savings in the bank, are living paycheck to paycheck. So what we do is we provide that safety net for people when they fall into those situations, but we also give them the stability that they need in order to start rebuilding their lives. And our programs like Scholarship is a perfect example. opens up a whole new world to people that would never be available to them otherwise. And they do appreciate that and come back. And we hear those stories quite a bit because people remember when no one else was there to help them, person to person was there to help them. And that got them to a place where they're safe and they're stable and they're happy and they're healthy. So there's no question that the help that we provide, I mean, I can see, because when you see the numbers, they're large numbers, and every year we're serving large numbers of people, but we're not serving the same people every year. We're serving people who are getting back on their feet and becoming productive members of society and giving back and working and having families. And without programs like Person to Person, you know, we would live in a community that would be full of despair. That's not good for anybody. So we all benefit when there's an opportunity for people to improve their lives and have an opportunity for a better future and have hope, and to be free of the kind of anxiety that comes from worrying whether you're going to be able to provide a roof for your family in the coming months. Those fears are very, very real. And I don't want to live in a community that doesn't have a way to provide hope to people.
Nancy Coughlin, our guest today on Community Matters. Here's that website address again. Just look at the bottom for more information about Person to Person. And Nancy, I want to thank you very much for being on the program today. I wish you all the best of luck, and personally thank you for all you do and all the staff does at Person to Person as well too.
Thanks, Jim. You know, this work is about bringing the community together. Person to Person can't do this work without people who are donating food and clothing and funds and volunteering. So it really is a community-wide effort, and we're grateful to be in this amazing community where people value volunteering and value community service and look out for each other. So as much as I am, you know, proud and honored that I'm in this role, I'm grateful to be in this community. So thank you to you, and thank you to everybody who makes this work possible.
Great. Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks,
and
Jim.
thank you, our viewers, for watching another edition of Community Matters.